Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information, enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Todd, you're muted.
Hey, guys.
Everyone. Todd's just having a little bit of technical difficulties, but welcome to another Tuesday night.
Hey, guys. I don't know. I guess my computer was arbitrarily hitting the mute. But anyway, guys, yes, Tuesday night, another live show. We have a great guest here for you tonight, Blaine. He is a real estate appraiser. We've had the blessing of having him on our show several times. I don't know, Blaine, 4 or 5 times. I don't even remember, but quite often we ask Blaine to come on the show because, I mean, he sees real estate from a much different aspect than we do as being on the sales side of things. He actually determines whether properties are worth what you all are paying for them. And of course, that's a big topic right now because a lot of people say the housing market is overpriced. And guys, the craziness that I'm seeing, I would say that I put myself into that category. But anyway, we're going to introduce you to him right now. Blaine, welcome back. And just tell everybody a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. Great to see you. Great to see Melissa. Always great to be back here. Love the show. Always honored to be on. Yeah, I'm a real estate appraiser. This will be my 22nd year. I was also a real estate salesperson and on the lending side before the appraisal side. So I like to think I speak all the languages, but being on the appraisal side now for almost 22 years, I get to see a lot of interesting stuff. And being that I work for a nationwide company, we're now the largest appraisal company in the country, True Footage. I get to talk to and see appraisal markets or real estate markets all over the country, which has been kind of great to see the differences.
Yeah, you get to see exactly what's happening because the markets are varying so much. Probably, and it's interesting because I haven't seen anything like this before, this kind of market where we have areas that are crashing and then we have areas that are still selling, in hours or days. And of course, our buyers, our audience, everybody's standing by saying, when are we going to see prices come down? So hopefully we get to answer some of those questions tonight, guys. It's a live show. Melissa, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself for those of you? And I know it's hard to believe that there may be some listeners that are joining us for the first time on our Tuesday night podcast and they don't know who you are. So let everybody know.
Yep. That's right. I'm Melissa Levine, and I've Todd's assistant, and I am honored to be on this show every Tuesday night and moderating all your questions. I am a licensed real estate agent here in Maryland, so I'm doing this every single day with Todd by my side. But yeah, I mean, inflation is hot. Everyone is talking about that. Doesn't seem to be really slowing down in some areas of this country. Home prices are decelerating. It's an interesting time, Blaine. Really looking forward to getting your thoughts on what's going on in the appraisal field right now. So it's really a pleasure to have you here with us this evening.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Great to be here.
Yeah, and Blaine, I know that if you're, telling people that you're a real estate appraiser, if you're going out, you may be at a dinner party or something with some people that you've never met before or your best friends, they're probably like, what the heck is going on? I mean, you've been in this market before. Just kind of tell everybody, because not everyone may know what the role is of a real estate appraiser, and you serve primarily the housing market. So, kind of give a watered down version of the role of an appraiser and, who you work for and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So at its core, especially on real estate or mortgage transactions, federally related mortgage transactions, the client of the appraiser is almost always the bank. It's the lender looking to mitigate risk on the transaction. They want to make sure that the collateral is supported and supported by facts in the market, FACTS, facts. And the facts in the market for a real estate appraiser are sold like kind comparable sales to whatever the property is that we're appraising. And the appraiser is appraising for the bank essentially to make sure that that collateral is there and supported. And important to note that the appraiser is appraising based on a very specific definite value to Fannie Mae, which is the most probable price in a competitive and open market where all conditions are requisite to a fair sale. Everybody's thinking clearly. Everybody's well-informed, well-advised, and there are no undue influences essentially affecting the sale.
Gotcha. Appreciate that clarification. So what kind of pressure is on the appraiser? Because you said, and a lot of people don't realize that because the buyers pay for the appraisal. They're the ones that write the check to have somebody come out. And I know, being in the business, if you call 3 appraisers, their opinions vary quite differently.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of protection, I guess. I would think. I mean, the bank, they're the one lending the money, and people are putting down very little nowadays. I mean, most people, they're putting down a little bit of money on such a big purchase. And so what kind of pressure do you have on you? And are there recourses where you could be actually held liable where, maybe you didn't make the right valuation, based on those conditions, and the bank takes the property back at one day during a, foreclosure? Are there any kind of, ramifications or pressures on you?
Yeah, great question. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the appraisers being part of a licensed profession, there's a ton of liability on appraisers. In fact, I would say more liability today than there was even 20 years ago. One, because of lending standards, they've changed after Dodd-Frank in 08, 09. Also now with the introduction of kind of this narrative around bias and whatnot. So there's, of course, explicit, and then there's implicit pressure. I wouldn't say we get a lot of explicit pressure. It's not like lenders are telling us we have to do something a certain way, but there's that implicit pressure of if this goes sideways, there's only a few people that are truly liable, and it's usually the licensed individuals in the transaction. Appraiser being one of them.
Yeah. So do you ever get pressures from, and I mean, maybe this isn't even appropriate to ask, but, would you think that you would get any pressure from the lender if appraiser wasn't appraising the properties for the value to actually, for them to get the loan? Could they actually just stop using you or stop calling you? Or
Yeah, it happens all the time, especially with the advent, or at least the kind of the rise of the AMC, which is the Appraisal Management Company. They've been around since the 60s, but they became really strong after Dodd-Frank in 09. And some major percentage of appraisals are ordered now through appraisal management companies. And so there is a lot of pressure, implicit pressure from the AMC in that if there's a pattern, for example, of not supporting a value on a sale price, we don't call that a low value. We typically just call that an appraised value. Because we know that a lot of the sale prices are elevated or inflated, sometimes way over list price. But if appraiser can't find support in the market, it happens all the time where the AMC just simply stops sending orders or removes an appraiser from the panel. So
wow.
There is that pressure.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that's your livelihood.
That's
the
right.
Appraiser's livelihood. I mean, they stop using them or whatever. I mean, basically they're out of business. And, and I guess the banks want to lend the money. So they want the appraiser to say, yes, it's worth it. Don't come back to me and tell me anything else, essentially, because, that would mean that the deal could fall through.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you seeing right now? I mean, tell us what's happening in your area, tell everybody where you're from, and then, kind of give us like a flyover view of, what's happening in your area. And are there any areas in the country that you see things, as tanking more than, others?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in the Grand Rapids, Michigan market, born and raised here, lived outside of here for several years, Chicago and around the country, but then always, people always come back. So back here in Grand Rapids, and our market in West Michigan, Melissa and I were talking about this before the show, is somewhat insulated in that I think many of our home prices around here, real estate prices, have been kind of artificially kept low by some unforeseen force. And so when the markets really picked up and people were leaving states like, for example, California or New York, or where real estate was much more expensive, they would come to West Michigan, Grand Rapids, and they would see that they could buy a lot more real estate for a lot less money. So our market has been fairly insulated from a lot of what's been going on. We're still extremely low inventory, like a lot of places in the country, strong buyer demand, multiple offer scenarios. Spring market has hit early. We're not really seeing what maybe some of the headlines are, but working for True Footage, I get to see markets all around the country. And we know that, for example, the Austin, Texas market is, I wouldn't use the word, say, tanking or crashing horribly, but it is declining. Boise, Idaho is declining. Parts of Miami, San Jose, San Francisco. There are just some areas of the country that probably were rising at a greater clip than other areas, and now they're taking the hit with price reductions and just seeing values decline.
Yeah. So you had mentioned when we were talking about, you were mentioning about before the Dodd-Frank Act and stuff like that, when we went through this massive crash in 2008, really started in 2006, really some areas in 2005, but 2006 was kind of the peak. I think, from that point, we had a landslide over pretty much most of the country. It all kind of crashed. And I know there were some guidelines that, major changes to guidelines and laws, especially when it came to appraisals. I kind of felt like back then the lender had this, hat that they pulled appraisers' names out of. Maybe, it was like, okay, well, we need this, so we're going to go to this hat, or we need that, or we'll use this hat, or whatever. And that kind of, they prevented a lot of that, what was happening back then with the liar loans and the, that kind of thing. So what makes this market, in your opinion, different from back then, other than the obvious? Do you see any similarities where maybe we're just at the beginning of this? I mean, we just went through the highest price value appreciation ever in the history of real estate. I mean, really sales, right? I mean, it skyrocketed. Prices went through the roof. The pressures, for buyers to overpay and sellers to not have to fix anything, do anything, sell their house in hours, cause traffic jams. I mean, there were a lot of changes. What were we missing back then that could have stopped this? We say about how everything's tightening. Oh, it's not like it was back in the day, but yet we saw the largest price appreciation, overinflated housing bubble ever.
Yeah.
So
well, as
what
you
are
know,
some of the differences?
Yeah, economics, obviously there's a lot of things that play into economics. Supply and demand is a big one. And we know that the demand outpaced the supply in most real estate markets. But we also know that a big factor, I mean, this is the most people, when you say the word inflation, they think that means prices rising. But that is just a symptom of what real inflation is. Inflation is inflating the money supply. And so when you have printing of money and you have essentially the Fed throwing money into the system, that is what real inflation is. It is inflating the money supply. And of course, when we add in the low interest rates, the low cost of funds, as it's called, you are fueling essentially everything we've seen now over the last 12, 13 years. You add those factors in and you get what we have today, essentially.
Yeah. So inflation is supposed to be expansion, right? Expansion of the money supply, just like you said, right? If you look back in the old dictionaries, that's what the definition of inflation really are meant to be. But we watch something. I mean, usually inflation goes with wage growth, right? I mean, wage growth goes with inflation, I guess, is a better way of saying it.
Yeah, they're closely tied together. There's so many factors that are playing in today that say weren't playing in maybe in 2008. and wage, we're heading into, I mean, if you look at the definition of, say, stagflation, which we experienced in the 70s, I was just a kid, but I've studied up on it. We're heading into maybe some of the factors that look similar to stagflation, where wage growth isn't keeping up. The money supply has been inflated. Prices are increasing, but wages aren't keeping up. You add in 2 years of shutting down the economy and a whole bunch of different factors. And by the way, we almost can't talk about local real estate markets without talking about the macro. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on globally. And obviously at this time, March 4th, March, are we in April? No, March 4th, right?
We're April.
We are April. Goodness.
We are.
Yeah, thank you. Normally we're a day or two behind. I'm a month behind. That goes to show you.
It's okay.
But we've had, again, the 2 years of shutting down the economy and all this. And then now we're seeing the bank closures. We're seeing stuff going on in Europe with Credit Suisse, with Deutsche Bank and all those things. Those are closely tied to what's going on in the United States. And it would always behoove people, Americans, I would encourage to get at least a basic education on global economic factors, because they are all tied together. It's very difficult to have a conversation about a local or a micro market without looking at what's going on globally. With the dollar, of course, there's lots of talk of de-dollarization and the kind of the end of the petrodollar and those things. And those will, if they're not affecting real estate today, they will affect real estate in the near term, if not the long.
I don't know if I'm having some technical difficulties. You guys, am I going out here? Something.
We can still hear you and see you.
We can still hear you and see you. The screen definitely changed.
Yeah,
I was trying to share my screen. I wanted to talk about, and let's see here if I can get this to happen again. What I really wanted to talk about, we were talking about the Fed rate, and I don't know, it doesn't want to behave. So I don't know if it's if I'm having some connectivity issues or not. Anyway, Melissa, let's take some questions.
Mm-hmm. Got a few to start it off. We've got first here, real estate mindset. Travis, thank you for the super cash as always. Don't know if I said that right at this point. I'm just rolling with it every show. But we've got Blaine. Are you worried about lenders moving to computer algorithms to calculate value versus a person going out to inspect the property?
Yeah, great question. Did you say Travis?
Yes.
Thank you for the question. Worried is not a word I would use, but there are a lot of appraisers who are worried about that. Obviously, with AVMs, automated valuation models, have been around since I got in the business 22 years ago. And when I started hearing about them, I brought it to my supervisor and said, "What are we going to do?" And he said, "Blaine, I've been in this for 20 years already, and they've always threatened to be putting appraisers out of business. Now here we are, 22 years after that." And although accelerating, it's not like it was 22 years ago. It's things are moving exponentially faster. Data has gotten that much better. And in fact, lenders are using that kind of data, automated valuation data and algorithms on almost every single loan to determine risk and risk mitigation. And in fact, we saw over the pandemic, we saw the rise of something called appraisal waivers, which Fannie Mae just kind of did a little PR spin. They're now calling those value acceptance. Important note about waivers and value acceptance, by the way, if you're working with a lender and you get a waiver on an appraisal waiver on a loan, that is not Fannie Mae rubber stamping the value, the market value of that house. They are simply waiving the requirement of an appraisal, and they are saying we're okay with the risk, but they are not saying that is the value, whatever the person is paying, that is the market value of the home. And there are a lot of buyers who've been somewhat duped after they buy the house where they get a waiver and they think, oh, Fannie Mae is saying my house is worth what I'm paying. And then they realize 2 or 3 years later that that is not the case. So super important to be educated on what that means. But yes, the rise of AI, ChatGPT, Bard, all of these things are coming into play. And appraisers, they're going to have to learn to play with the tech and learn to kind of meld their services with it. There are some scenarios where a human is absolutely required. I would say most scenarios today. Now, if you're in a tract development where it's the same builder and all of the houses are all the same, or a condo development where there's homogeneity, everything is homogeneous and the same, that's where algorithms and AVMs do really, really well. But in neighborhoods that are not homogeneous, you quite often need the human to use their five senses. That's one of the benefits of having a human in the transaction, is they can smell smells, they can see things that the algorithm can't see, they can see cracks in the foundation and whatnot, and they can give a little bit deeper insight into what is truly a comparable sale and what is not. I mean, we see from Zillow how skewed sometimes that data is, because it's just a large data aggregator, and that is a computer algorithm and an automated valuation model that sometimes it nails it, and then the next day it's wildly off. That's essentially what you get. The machine doesn't always know what it's doing.
Blaine, I was going to ask you, do you put any credence at all in Zillow's, their Zestimate? I mean, do you think it's a good system? I mean, it was broken. They stopped Zillow offers. One of the reasons is because they blamed their Zestimate model. I believe that was one of the reasons why they said, their estimates were off when they were making their own decisions on buying properties and selling them. I mean, do you ever look at that when you're appraising a home to say, well, what's Zillow say?
Yeah, great question. By the way, for Zillow, if you guys recollect, that was a $500 million mistake that they made when they closed down Zillow offers. That's a big problem. And never once, we have some former Zillow executives that now work for True Footage. And they told us one of the most surprising things is they never hired appraisers. They just relied on their own algorithm to decide things. And again, that cost them $500 million plus. No, appraisers, we can and do use some of the Zillow tools that are available. For example, if we need to use a FSBO, a for sale by owner, as a comparable sale, it wasn't on the local MLS, but quite often people will post the information on Zillow to sell their home. And so you'll find all the pictures of the interior and what they listed it for, what they sold it for. And that's quite often very helpful to us if it's not listed on the MLS. But as far as like going to Zillow to use the valuation tools, no appraiser in their right mind would rely on that.
As a follow-up, excuse me just one moment because I wanted to put this in here. But as a follow-up, we got Johnny Fly who made a comment. I think a computer algorithm to do an appraisal would be impossible. A computer algorithm can't detect how well the home is taken care of and whatnot, but it could provide a decent baseline.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Johnny Fly. Thank you for that. And appraisers know that. The humans know it. I mean, we use tech, we use algorithms ourselves when we're scanning for or trying to extract adjustments from the market for certain features or differences, a swimming pool versus no swimming pool, 3-stall garage, 2-stall garage. So we use that kind of technology, but he's exactly right that the algorithm is good at, or the big data is good at just that, big data. It can aggregate large amounts of data, but it doesn't know if 1, 2, 3, 4 is the same as 1, 2, 3, 6. It doesn't know if this house is taken care of better than this one, if this one has an updated kitchen, this one has an updated bath. It just doesn't know that stuff.
Well, I know the sellers rely on it a lot of times. And, we hear it all the time where you'll go on a listing appointment and they'll say, well, my house is worth, $460,000 according to Zillow. And I remember when Zestimate first came out, we were all like, oh, great, here we go. I mean, they couldn't see inside the house and yet they're putting values on the home. And so we've been dealing with that for quite some time as agents. Are you seeing appraisal issues right now? Or are there any states where it seems like there's a run on, houses being sold overpriced?
Yeah. So Fannie Mae has a system called CU, or collateral underwriter, if anybody out there is familiar with it. And so all of the loan information for those lenders who choose to use CU, they'll run the whole loan through CU, and it will get a score, and then they'll run the appraisal through CU, and the collateral underwriter score will get spit out. And as long as the score comes out, it's a risk score from 0 to 5. 5 being the worst, highest risk deal. And so if the appraisal goes through and it comes out with a risk score of 2.5 or below, the lender gets what's called reps and warrants. It's essentially Fannie Mae saying to the lender, we will relieve you of all liability should this loan go bad. Now, they don't relieve the appraiser, but essentially they're saying it's a reasonable enough appraisal. Anything below 2.5, 2, 1.5, 1, that's getting towards great appraisal level. And Fannie Mae will also pull 30 of its own, what it thinks are comparable sales, and it will try to match those up with the ones that the appraiser has. So quite often the appraiser will get a question from the lender, hey, why didn't you use this sale or that sale? Because Fannie Mae thinks this might be a better sale. So from that standpoint, we're always seeing, and this has been going on a long time, we're always seeing what we might call issues of either overvaluation or undervaluation. By the way, those are the two most common risk flags from Fannie Mae: overvaluation and undervaluation. And you can imagine the markets where you would get either one. In the last 7, 8, 10 years, we've seen, of course, more risk flags for overvaluation. And the issues quite often are simply that when the market is rising as fast as it has been over the last 10 years, the comparable sales aren't keeping up with sale prices. Every sale in a rising market is the highest sale since yesterday, but the best comparable sale hasn't kept up with it. And so that is one of the drawbacks of an appraisal. It's always backward looking. We're never speculating forward. We think, the highest sale is 350, but we think the market could go to 375. That's not what an appraisal is. It's as of this day, the best fact in the market, or the best sold and closed like kind property is X. And that's what Fannie Mae more or less bases its decision on. So I would say the appraiser's life is always filled with some issues from somebody, whether it's overvaluation, undervaluation. We want different comps. We want more explanation or something.
So geographically, where are you seeing the more red flags on, hey, is this property really worth it?
Well, that certainly would be in the markets that were more rapidly increasing at a greater clip than, say, an average market, where houses are increasing in valuations 15, 18, 20% year over year. That's not sustainable. You've been in this a long time, Todd, longer than me. I asked a group at a training session last week. This was a younger group of newer agents, been in the business less than 5 years. And I said, what do you think the average annual appreciation of a house would be in a normal market? They all said 10 or 12%, which means it shows their newness in the market. You and I both know 3 to 5% would be really, really good. 3% would be considered average in a normal market. So when houses are increasing 16, 18, 20% year over year, it's just unsustainable. And again, there's just no way that appraisals can keep up, because the comparable sales aren't keeping up with those kinds of things. And that would have been, some of that's changing now, but it would have been in the Boise, Idaho was one of the fastest growing markets in the country the last several years. Austin, Texas, parts of Miami, San Francisco, areas of New York, these were markets that were just sailing. You couldn't buy a house. So
are they geographically then rated on that chart that you were referencing, the 1 to 5, or, as far as risk factors? I mean, are these areas automatically, going into the, hey, let's pay close attention to this appraisal?
Yeah. It goes both ways. So, for example, just after 2008, when the market crashed, there were areas of the country, there were certain areas of our city here, and there were certain areas of your area, your city, that were flagged in Fannie Mae as an area where prices had dropped or values had dropped significantly. And so typically they either wanted a second appraisal or they needed a lot of commentary, and they wanted to make sure that the comparable sales were adjusted appropriately. For example, if they were comparable sales that were a year old that had sold in a higher market, they wanted to make sure those had negative adjustments, assuming those sales would sell for less today because the value had dropped. And so in an increasing market, you see the opposite. You see where appraisers have to give adjustments to a comparable sales because if they would have sold today instead of 3 months ago, they would have sold for more. And so those will trigger those risk scores in Fannie Mae. And Fannie Mae most certainly does have, it sees the areas, it's pulling in millions of appraisals every year, and it is seeing the data all over in different cities. In fact, if nobody's ever seen it, Fannie Mae has these heat maps. I believe Freddie Mac has them too, where you can see certain areas of the country in colors of where values are increasing the most, where they're declining the most on any given week or month. I believe Zillow has some similar tools like that. But it's interesting to see that they have that data. And so, yeah, when an appraisal comes in one of those, let's call it a red area, increasing the most, they want to make sure that truly the best comps are being chosen, the best commentary or explanation of the rationale is in that report, so that if it does trigger an overvaluation risk score, that a human underwriter can look at it and kind of clear the conditions or ask for what they need.
You had mentioned, in an area where or a time when home prices are appreciating rapidly, it's kind of hard to keep up because you're looking at data. I guess you're allowed to go back. What typically, I guess it's preferred 6 months, right?
Yeah, there are no rules in that regard. Fannie Mae actually says that the best comp is the one that tells the best story. But then there are something called lender overlays, because we all know that most lenders are packaging up their loans in $1 million or $10 million tranches, and they're selling those off to investors. So those investors will have requirements. They call them overlays. So although Fannie Mae doesn't require it, some particular lender could say, we want 2 of your sales to be within 90 days, and then the others can be up to 1 year or so on and so forth. The best comparable sale might be 18 months old. It might be right next to the subject property that we're appraising. It might be the neighboring house that was built by the same builder and cared for like the subject property was. So it behooves the appraiser to be able to use those. They just wouldn't use it as maybe one of their top 3 or 4 comparable sales, but they could use that in the report. So there really is no time frame, but in swiftly moving markets, whether they're rapidly increasing or rapidly declining, obviously the most recent sales are the best representation of the current market. So it helps to have a sale within the last 90 days if the market is either moving up or moving down.
So you just described something pretty interesting, the overlays. So at what point does an appraiser know that this loan is being bundled and sold to this group and their, requirements are this? So you're kind of looking at, I guess then sort of like 2 types of mandates, right? I mean, you have one that maybe Fannie Mae has, or that, that specific lender, and then the overlay or the secondary market. When are you privy to that? And, how does that vary?
Yeah, great question. So there's 3 primary mandates that every appraiser has to follow. There is Fannie Freddie, their requirements. There is the lender and their investors. And then, of course, there's USPAP, which is the standards of principle and practice that appraisers have to follow. It's kind of the laws that govern our ethics, our reporting, and all that stuff. But as far as the lender is concerned, we would know that in the letter of engagement. So, for example, if Bank of America orders an appraisal, all appraisers know they can read a ridiculously long 5-page letter of engagement with 50 different requirements and specific comments they want. And most good appraisers, they'll do one appraisal for Bank of America and they'll start to include that commentary in their quick lists. So every time they do an appraisal for a Bank of America loan, they'll automatically put those required comments in that Bank of America requires. That's usually how it works. Is specific lenders or banks or credit unions, they'll have similar letters of engagement and requirements on their appraisals.
Yeah. So what are you seeing with that? What kind of changes or tightening? Is there anything going on where they're,
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've seen a whole lot yet there, although it might show up in the letters of engagement where a lender that was much looser on comparable sale requirements now is getting a little tighter. Now they want to see 2 sales within 90 days and 1 sale within a year, those kinds of things. That's where we'll typically see those requirements showing up. There's also something that's gone on in the appraisal world now we've seen it a lot in the last 10 years called scope creep. So the scope of appraisal 10 years ago was much easier. And now it's as if the lenders or the investors are trying to shift more and more responsibility and liability over onto the appraiser. So the scope of work required, there's been some creep in there where now they require the appraiser needs to comment on the furnace working properly or the roof or the this or the that. And as most would know, most appraisers are not mechanical contractors or roofers or carpenters for that matter. And so to ask an appraiser to be able to comment on how well a mechanical system is working is standard scope creep. It doesn't necessarily play into the overall valuation of the house, but it's now putting the liability on the appraiser. We've heard of appraisers being sued because the house was 67 degrees when they walked in, so they assumed the furnace was working. Buyer moves in, furnace goes out a month later, they blame it on the appraiser. Appraiser said it was working. We've heard appraisers getting sued because they saw, things on the ceiling that looked like carbon monoxide detectors, but they were smoke detector only, and they said smoke alarm and carbon monoxide, and then they get sued when somebody gets sick or something happens. So a lot of that is being placed on real estate appraisers these days.
Yeah, I was going to say these days.
Yeah, for sure.
We're seeing a lot happen these days. There was just a lawsuit that was published on National Association of Realtors that they kind of pulled the appraiser in, I guess, as a witness in this case, that the appraiser had, when he was appraising the house, had met the listing agent and had mentioned to the listing agent that it looked like there was water intrusion in the house and that there was a negative grade coming into the foundation. And, the agent said, in the 38 years that the seller has lived here, they've never had a water issue. Of course, nothing was in writing, and the agent denied that, that statement from the appraiser. But when you're explain to people the difference. So when you're appraising a conventional loan versus an FHA or a VA loan, can you kind of go over, what are you looking for that is different between, those loan types?
Sure. Yeah. The biggest differentiating factors between a conventional loan and an FHA loan, just on the loan side, is who's backing the loan, essentially. And so on an FHA loan or a VA loan, it's the government who is essentially backing the loan. And so they allow an easing of credit requirements, the credit rating, of the buyer, lower down payments and things like that. So the government, HUD in this case, or the Veterans Administration, we do a lot of USDA loans, rural development, those kinds of things. Since they're backing the loan essentially, and they're allowing a much lower down payment, they have much higher risk. They want to make sure that all of the health and safety issues in that home are mitigated to the degree they can be prior to the buyer moving into the house. And so this is an area where, and this has always been this case, where the appraisers, being the boots on the ground, eyes and ears in the property, need to essentially note anything that could be considered a health and safety issue. Everybody knows the most common one: chipping, peeling paint. Doesn't matter the year, even though the magic year is 1978, because lead was in the paint prior to that. But if it's a wood structure and there's chipping, peeling paint, well, it means that the wood structure is going to decay faster. Therefore, the asset is going to degrade faster. They want that scraped and painted. No handrails on stairwells. Open stairwells going down to basements, though, they have to have some type of wall so a child can't fall off a top stair down to the cement floor. Tripping hazards, broken windows, real basic stuff, but stuff that the common person would look at and go, that's probably a health and safety issue. No light switch covers, no outlet covers. Child could stick their finger in there, touch a wire, get electrocuted. Health and safety issue. So those are things that will always be called out by a good appraiser, real obvious stuff. And they typically have to be repaired, mitigated before the loan can close.
Now, why do you think that is? I mean, do you feel that they're thinking, there's a higher risk of someone not having the money that is maybe taking one of these loan products, that there's a higher risk that they won't be able to make those repairs?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's twofold. I think it's that exactly. Let's find it before the buyer gets in there and has to incur that cost and that hassle to make the seller fix these things. But it's also risk mitigation It's making sure that the asset, that what is being conveyed is up to standards, and it's so that there are no lawsuits basically after the sale, so that the buyer can move into a structurally sound, healthy, safety structure without issues, and nobody's going to be sued in the transaction.
Blaine, and we'll take a couple questions here, but Blaine, one of the big questions that I have is, and I don't know what the numbers are exactly of defaults. It's very hard to get data that you can analyze efficiently and effectively, right? Because I mean, depending on where you're going for the information, it's skewed data and it's backward looking and things like that. So when we're looking at, there haven't been foreclosures or many foreclosures, we know that we're just low, we're at an all-time low for foreclosures, and we know that people are still struggling, and we know that there are people that aren't making their mortgage payments and the modification programs since COVID. And though it is up quite a bit from a year ago, it's still very hard to get that data. But we do know that FHA is coming out with this remodification of the 30-year to a 40-year mortgage for borrowers that are in default with an FHA loan. And I know VA has that product, so they're saying, hey, we're just trying to match the VA option. But the big concern that I have is exactly what you just said. We know that there are sort of like a higher level of safety evaluation that's being done from an appraiser when they're looking at a FHA or a VA loan. And so do you think in order to do a loan modification from casting that 30-year balance to a 40-year loan, these people have lived in their house for however many years, they're not making their payments or have defaulted. We know in the business that when that starts to happen, there's a lot of deterioration on the inside. I mean, things break, houses fall apart. And if you're not keeping up on it, they depreciate in value. I mean, so what happens is some of these things that you mentioned may now exist that didn't exist when they first bought the home. Do you feel that you will be involved or in this, new modification, that they'll have another inspection, or you think they'll just, skip it?
It's a great question. I would sure hope so. I mean, I would consider that a refinance. It technically is, by definition, a refinancing of the house. It's a reamortization of that loan from whatever it is today at 10 years, and they're going to reamortize it out to 40. So I would certainly hope. But we also know, just came out a month ago, Fannie Mae announced that standard 1004 appraisals, that's a full appraisal. 1004 is the form that it signifies a full appraisal, where an appraiser goes out to the house and walks through. Fannie Mae came out with an announcement and said full appraisals are no longer the default for Fannie Mae. So Fannie Mae has come out with a couple more products, they call them. Again, they've kind of renamed the appraisal waiver to value acceptance. And then they have a level up from that called value acceptance plus data. This is the hybridization of the appraisal process, whereby now they are kind of cutting out the appraiser in some cases from the process. And they're either saying, well, we already know enough about that house, and then we can look at the AVM or the aggregated data, and we feel good enough about doing this loan without needing an appraisal. I'm fine with that. That's their money. It's their loan, and it's their risk. But we are seeing what appears to be something of an effort to potentially bring in untrained, unlicensed people to do the data portion, or what they call the PDC, which is property data collection, which is basically Fannie Mae saying, look, if we don't want to incur the cost and potential liability of sending out a licensed, experienced appraiser to do this appraisal, let's give people some training, say 3 hours of training. They'll get a certificate they can put on their wall, and they can become a PDC for Fannie Mae, a property data collector. This could be an Uber driver. It could be a teacher. It could be a real estate agent. They will not be a licensed appraiser. Presumably, they won't be bonded and insured. And they will go out to the home, and they will gather the data, or do the equivalent of what would be the appraiser's inspection, measuring up the house, taking all the photos, and doing all that stuff. And essentially they'll pay them a pittance to do this kind of work. So we suspect we'll in these refinance type scenarios or reamortizations, most likely they'll go that route first, and they'll just send out a property data collector to see what state the house is in, and then determine from that data after they look at the pictures, okay, should we get a real appraiser involved in this? And that's, again, the hybridization, because then they'll send that information, that data that was gathered by the data collector, to the licensed appraiser. It's up to the licensed appraiser to choose whether or not they want to rely on that data to do the analysis, to do the rest of the appraisal at the desk, on the form. So
whether you rely on the property police.
Yeah. And of course, being somebody who's been in this for 22 years, we know what it takes to train somebody up to really learn all the nuances of a piece of real estate, looking at the exterior, the interior, walking through and noticing a lot of things. I mean, I have appraisers been working for me for 10 years and they still miss stuff. So there's no way you give somebody 3 hours of training and a certificate to put on the wall, and they're going to be able to gather enough of the right data that a experienced, knowledgeable and wise licensed appraiser is going to rely on that data to do a full appraisal. And there are a lot of appraisers who's just simply saying, we're not going to do it. Not to mention for you guys on the real estate sales side of things, as a listing agent, I don't know if I would want to let those people into my listings. You have a responsibility to your listing clients, and now you have this person who is unlicensed. They got 3 hours of training. You don't necessarily know their background, although Fannie Mae says they're going to give them background checks. But now they're going to walk through your house for the next 45 minutes. I'm not so sure how well that will go, but I suspect Fannie will go that route first on these reamortizations to see.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, because if the house doesn't qualify or wouldn't have qualified for the loan in the first place, what are they going to do at that point? I mean, these people don't have the money to fix things up if they're not paying their mortgage payments. So, what will happen? Will they just force the default and, proceed with foreclosures, or will there be some type of, renovation loan product or something like that, where they're like, hey, your roof is leaking, we're going to fix it for you and roll it into your mortgage? I don't know. It sounds like a mess.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we know what the Fed's policy has been for the last 10 years. The KTC method, which is basically kick the can down the road. Just let's keep kicking it down the road to see what happens. So I suspect that might be the method they choose again. Is let's just kick it another 10 years down the road and see what happens. But it's obviously it's just delaying the inevitable.
That's it. I mean, really, they don't want to see foreclosures in Washington right now. I mean, I get it. But at what point do you realize that, hey, it's not going to get any better just by extending the loan? We've had multiple modifications and not that I want to see people displaced. That's not the idea at all. I think it's terrible. Watching foreclosures happen. I mean, it's devastating. But,
and we will see more of it. I mean, it's the economy is heading that direction. We're seeing, the JOLT report came out today. We're seeing the job loss and the employment numbers, which are always skewed, by the way. If you're watching mainstream media, they're always skewed. Just like inflation is always skewed. They peg inflation at whatever they're pegging it at, 5-6%. We know real inflation is 18, 19, 20%. When you actually go to the grocery store, you put gas in your car, inflation is way over. We know they pull its core inflation. They're pulling out the two most expensive things from that, which is energy costs and essential living or food costs. And then now they've come up with an inflation number where they pull out housing costs, which again, probably the most important numbers when it comes to how you and I experience inflation are our energy costs, our food costs, and our housing costs. Those are way over 6%.
Yeah, you're right. And it's always in real estate, it's backward looking data, right? I mean, we talk about this all the time. I mean, somebody called me today and they said, well, what do you think about the housing market? You think we've hit the bottom and we're on our way back up again? And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I don't know how that could possibly be. I don't know what your opinion is on that, but we'll touch on it. But Melissa, let's take some questions. Any questions for Blaine?
Yep, talking about the defaults and the loan modifications, we had a question from Michael Ross. An auctioneer told me banks are asking him and others to get ready for a foreclosure wave beginning this month. Have you heard this?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Michael. We've been hearing this now for several years, that there is a wave of foreclosures coming, and it very well could be. I always like to say, well, one, we don't have a crystal ball. Two, there's no certainties. There's only probabilities. I don't know what the probabilities are of a massive foreclosure wave, but I wouldn't doubt that there will be cycles of foreclosures that are increasing over the coming years. Just again, knowing the macro situation, what's happening with the dollar, what's happening with bank runs, what's happening with bank failures. There are a slew of bank failures that are slated over the next couple of years. This thing has only kind of just begun. We don't know how that's going to spread to the real estate market, and the job market and everything else. But I wouldn't doubt that foreclosures are on their way.
So, Blaine, along with that question, I know an agent that does a lot of, REOs, foreclosures. And he was saying that Fannie Mae had actually, excuse me, sent out a map. It was like, hey, these states have the largest number of defaults. And of course, they were the big ones, California, Texas, what are you seeing those? Do they provide you with these maps as well?
No, I haven't seen those. I would love to see those, but I haven't seen anything like that. I'm going to go on a search as soon as we're done with this and see if I can find something similar because I'd love to see it. But I believe it's out there. And probably my guess is when I would look at it, I would go, well, of course. Yeah. California. It's probably going to be Boise, Idaho, Austin, Texas, California. These areas where
Arizona.
Yeah, areas of Arizona. You bet. Yeah. It's going to be all those areas where you couldn't buy a house unless you were overpaying by 60% 2 years ago, and now people can't afford them. Or
are you seeing any more of that?
Yeah, it's still going on. Yeah, the spring market. You mean increases in sales?
No, as far as appraisal gap contingencies, things like that. I mean, you get to see the contracts.
Yep. It started back up in my market here in Grand Rapids in Western Michigan. We saw the receding of those ending going into the winter season. We stopped seeing the appraisal gap clauses and the escalation clauses. And we thought, oh, it's done. Good. Things are finally starting to stabilize. But as of probably a month ago, even though there's still snow flying every now and then here, the spring market has hit. Escalation clauses are back in fad, as are appraisal gap clauses in this market. And I suspect there are other markets that are on fire around the country that are increasing as well.
I think a lot of real estate agents think the appraiser can be tricked, in certain ways. And one of the things that I see, and I don't know if you've witnessed this, but if somebody does happen to sell that price for, over list price, the house for over list price,
yeah,
sometimes the agent will go in and raise the price in the MLS. Do you ever see that?
For sure, all the time. And I like to believe they're not doing it so much to trick us, because if I believed that, I would lose faith in real estate agents, because we get to see the whole listing history, and we have to report the 12-month listing history on every appraisal. So we get to see that it was listed for $395, and then all of a sudden they raised the price to $445 a week later. Oh, it just happens it's selling for $445. So we do get to see that. I think a lot of agents do it to pad their stats, because they get to raise the numbers, the sold numbers. But to any agents out there who think they are fooling the appraiser, they are not. We get to see all that data.
Good stuff. All right, Melissa.
Talking about gathering data, we had the Duke with a super chat. Thank you so much. Is there a good source for raw data for a non-real estate agent? Data analytics guy, always looking for other sources for own purchase.
Good question, Duke. Appreciate you asking that. My answer is I don't know. If there is a good source for raw data,
I could tell you the MLS isn't. Our own MLS is not a very good source. It is no real time data like the stock market. I mean, look, there are sites out there, Altos, ALTOS research. They seem to have a pretty decent algorithm, data collection. They have staff that actually researches and tries to grab as much up-to-date information. I'm not plugging them because I'm paid to do so. I'm just telling you that it seems to be a good source out there. They do sell their data subscriptions to brokerages and lenders and things like that on specific cities or areas. But no, I mean, none that I know of. I mean, as far as Blaine, you're probably looking at the same exact thing that I am.
Yeah.
And it's always backward looking. We don't get our smart charts, that kind of show a deeper dive into what took place over the last 30 days until halfway into the next month. So, I mean, now, mid-April, we'll get the stats on March. I mean, that's not very good. It's not accurate. It's not up to date. So we have to treat everything, individually and sort of, look at what's active, what's pending. Sometimes pick up the phone and make calls and say, hey, what's going on? You have this listing. Do you have any offers? How much activity do you have? We try and get a pulse of what's going on. But no, it's pretty laborious.
Yeah. And to the Duke's question, data is a big thing. It's a big word and it encompasses a lot of stuff. So not sure exactly what raw data he'd be looking for. He says always looking for other sources for his own purchase. So I don't know if he means like non-MLS sources of purchases. There's the legal news. You can find houses going into default and foreclosure and sheriff sale and, those kinds of things. Those are typically subscriptions you would buy to the legal news. And those are everywhere around the country. You can get those. So I'm not sure if that's what he's looking for, but we all kind of have access to the same data in that regard.
Yeah.
We've got a question here from Night Cry. I see people looking 50 miles away for comps. Isn't that sort of false value if the comp is in a completely different county?
Yeah, great question, Night Cry. It's all regional. It really depends. If you're a farmhouse on 57 acres in a rural area, 50 miles away might be the appropriate distance to go to find some comparable sales because everything is on 50 to 100 acres. So it's a tough question to answer. In my city, you wouldn't go more than 12 blocks because it's a suburban urban area and you're going to look in similar developments that are typically close by. 50 miles away, depending on the area, seems like a long distance, but I'd have to know the area. If you're in rural Montana, 50 miles is probably a short distance. I mean, we have appraisers in Idaho that cover Idaho and Wyoming, and sometimes they're pulling comparable sales in different states because of they're on excessive or surplus acreage and a couple hundred acres and a big ranch and outbuildings and horse barns and things like that. You might have to go 100 miles away to find something similar. So it really does matter the area.
And I think, people think you can just take a radius and you can't even really do that because when you're crossing, major streets or intersections and you're going into different subdivisions and, just like you had indicated, Blaine, I mean, 10 blocks is a big deal. So, I think agents do that a lot as well. They think that they can just take the MLS, look at what has sold in a half a mile radius or a quarter mile radius, and it's just not accurate.
Yeah. I've been teaching for a long time, both appraisers and agents, this concept that when we're filtering for true comparable sales, there's a phrase that is always going through my head. And we've trained all our appraisers to have this phrase going through theirs. And it's when you're looking at a sale, before you label it a comparable sale, you look at it and then you ask yourself, would my buyers or would this agent's buyers consider this a suitable alternative to the subject property that we're appraising if the subject property was not available? And if you can't honestly, in your heart and at your core, say, yes, that's a suitable alternative, it's not a comparable sale. So if you have to go into a completely different development or you got to go miles away, just because it looks similar, if it's $100,000 more than the one that the people are buying, and I ask the question, would your buyers consider that one an alternative to this one if this one wasn't available? And they say anything but yes, absolutely. It's not a comparable sale. And that's not the only factor that makes it comparable. But in most cases, they would say something like, well, no, they wouldn't because they can't afford $100,000 more. Okay, then it's not a comparable sale. Oh, it's in that gated development and they can't afford that develop. Okay, then it's not a comparable sale. So if it's truly not a suitable alternative, and as we know, there's big M market. That's what we're talking about tonight, the market. And then there's little M market, and there's tens of thousands of little M markets in every town. A market can be one street long. A market can be 4 or 5 streets. It can be a gated development. It can be a school system. But typically, at least from an appraisal standpoint, comparable sales are located in similar markets, typically the same little M market that the subject property is located in. So yeah, if agents are going miles away just to find something that looks similar, they're probably missing those factors, Todd, that you said. They're crossing major boundaries. They're crossing highways and rivers and school systems and those kinds of things. And we see it all the time. We see it in.
I think another metric that I think is misused is square footage. They'll look at what is advertised as the square footage of the home, and a lot of times that data is wrong because the agent will put in estimated data, or they're including below grade or finished space, and they're not separating it properly, or garage areas are included and things like that. So speak to square footage and why it varies. The prices vary so much based on what's above grade and what's below grade. And for those of you, you may be listening from a state like Texas that doesn't have basements, but when we're saying below grade, we're really referring to homes with basements.
Yeah, great question. So price per square foot is one of the most misleading factors that we run into, especially with agents. So I'll always ask agents when I'm teaching class, show of hands, who uses price per square foot, either for pricing or for finding comparable sales. And usually half or more of the hands go up. And I will always say, with compassion, don't throw it out of your toolbox, but make it the 15th tool you use after you use 14 other better tools. Here's why. As we know, buyers don't buy square footage. They buy homes in neighborhoods on lots with fences and bedrooms and bathrooms and condition and quality and so on and so forth. And so to condense all of those factors down to one factor, square footage, leads people to believe that the price of that home can be crunched into a ball called square footage. So that's one problem. The second problem is, as you mentioned, quite often that information on square footage is incorrect. We find in our market, 65% of the time the assessing data on square footage is incorrect, and about 75% of the time in the MLS. Because in our MLS, I don't know if it's the same in yours, the agent has the choice of which source they use. They can use a prior appraisal, they can use the homeowner's estimate, all these different factors. And so quite often, the appraiser gets out there and measures it per ANSI standards down to the 10th of an inch, and they go, or 10th of a foot, and they'll say, we're 500 square feet off from what the reported data. That makes a big difference. Here's the other factor when it comes to price per square foot. There is an inverse correlation between square footage and price, meaning the more square footage you have, the lower the price per square foot. So you can have a very small house, 1,000 square feet, and it's sold for $225 per square foot. And then you got a 3,000 square foot house, and the price per square foot might be smaller or lower because you're spreading the price over more square feet. So there's an inverse correlation. And what we see happening is that agents will find a small house, they'll see it sold for $200 per square foot, and then they'll take that number and extrapolate it to the big house. And they'll say, well, if this one sold for $200 per square foot, let's find this 3,000 square foot house. That one must be worth $600,000. And that's just not the way it works, because the dollars are spread out over more square feet. So I would say, unless it's brand new construction or very homogeneous condo properties or developments where every house is exactly the same, they have the same amenities, the same floor plans, they built in the same year, then the dollars per square foot becomes a more reliable factor. And we know in new construction, because that's the way builders quote, I can build this house for X dollars per square foot with these finishes. You want to change the finishes? It adds $10 per square foot. Oh, you want to finish the basement? Well, that's going to be $47 per square foot. So we can use square footage or price per square foot on certain things, but I would never use it to price, or at least the only factor. And I would never use it as a comparable factor because of all the problems that lie within price per square foot. There's so many other things that go into it.
So Blaine, when you see there is such a big discrepancy in what is reported on a tax record versus what you're actually looking at, I mean, does anything, cause you to think about, were additions built maybe without permits and things like that? I mean, at what point do you as an appraiser say, I wonder why there is such a huge discrepancy? Maybe somebody built a 500 square foot addition on the back of their house. You're measuring that. It's different from tax record. Any red flags?
Yeah, it does depend on, of course, the municipality. It depends on the type of house. So, for example, in our area, maybe you have them in yours, but we have these, 1.5 story, bungalows or Cape Cods or whatever. And for example, our assessing departments here, what they will do is they will take the square footage of the footprint of the main level of the house, and then they will just use a multiple factor. They'll say, oh, it's a 1.5 story house. So they'll multiply the footprint of the house by 1.5. And so if the footprint is 1,000 square feet on the main level, they'll say it's a 1,500 square foot house. And then you go up and you measure that upper level, and it's 223 square feet. And you go, really, this is a 1,223 square foot house, not 1,500. So that's where we'll see discrepancies quite often. And our assessing data is fairly good, at least as far as the sketches go. So we can always pull sketches and measure, test those sketches against what's really there. Quite often the other factor is sometimes how assessing departments will measure stairwells or open areas. They'll include areas that are open, a 2-story foyer, but they won't show that on the sketch. So they'll include that as all square footage and things like that. But certainly good appraisers, they will look at that data first. They will make all the notes or the red flags to check when they get to the house. And then quite often we can find, oh, that's why the square footage is off. There's a 2-story foyer here, and they didn't report it in the square footage. So it's overestimating the square footage.
Yeah. Do you ever see, I'm asking because we see this sometimes where, additions are built without permits. Do you ever find that? And, does the bank ever question that? And does it ever, come up to, hey, was this addition permitted? And is there any requirement of the appraiser to raise that question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Happens all too often where you see an addition was put on, and then it behooves a good appraiser to check with the local zoning ordinance, see if permits were pulled, because where an unpermitted, we've run into it before where not only is it unpermitted, but then when you research and dig further, it wouldn't have been permitted should they have gone for the permit. It's not so simple as now getting the code enforcement out and they go, okay, little fine for not pulling a permit, but everything looks good. No, they come out and say, we wouldn't have granted you a permit to begin with. This is not allowed here. So that is a problem. And it certainly would be a problem for the bank if the appraiser doesn't catch that, because they are loaning money on now something that has something added to it that will get probably found out at some point.
Yeah, we're seeing a big rise of this too in especially in Baltimore City. I mean, we're getting calls where, the inspectors or the neighbor will call and say construction's going on, and, the inspector will come out, and if the contractor's not there, they're taking pictures through the windows and putting stop work orders on the front doors, and, fining, the property owner, the contractors, for doing work without permits. But, we know, I mean, it happens. And, and I know, just like you said, that they may be required to tear that addition down, if it doesn't meet the setbacks and there's opposition and they go for a variance or whatever. But yeah, Melissa, more questions?
Yeah, we've got a comparable question here from Charlton Zimmerman. Blaine, how many comp properties go into your appraisal?
Yeah, great question, Carlton. Typically, I would say good appraisers are typically putting on the low end 4, on the high end 9 comparable sales. It really just depends on the property and what story we're trying to tell to the underwriters, how much evidence, how much data, and how much support needs to go in. I would say in my office, 5 to 6 comps is pretty standard on every report. I personally don't think you can tell a really good story with only 3 comparable sales. Back in the day when I first got into appraisal, that's all that was required. And in fact, the only photos that were ever required, front, street, and rear scene of the house, no interior photos. Company I worked for always put interior photos in, even though the bank never requested it. And I used to always ask, why wouldn't the bank want to know what the interior of the house looks like? Well, of course, after 08, 09, they changed all that. Now you have to put interior photos. Just makes sense. They want to see the condition of the house. But 3 comparable sales in most cases, unless they're tract homes, same development, same builder, same age, they're all perfect sales. Most appraisers need to use 4, 5, or 6 sales to tell a really good story, in my opinion.
I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well. Talking about new construction, we had Pat Garrett ask, why aren't home builders building smaller, affordable, first home buyer homes?
Great question, Pat. I have no idea. I used to be a builder, and that's essentially what we would build. It certainly is there's a shortage of that, and I don't know why they aren't. I guess maybe the theory is people are paying for anything and everything, so why not go where there's bigger margins, I guess, if there are, in fact, bigger margins. I mean, I know several builders who always built bi-level houses because the margins were so good. You could put it on a smaller lot. People got more for their money, essentially. It was that first-time home buyer. You only had to pour half of a foundation and so on and so forth. But you just don't see a whole lot of that now. Maybe it's because land is getting more expensive. So builders or developers who are buying that land at inflated prices or higher prices are putting bigger houses on them. But it's a great question for sure. We are seeing more apartment buildings and more condos going up to, I think, fill that need, that first-time home buyer or that first-time home buyer price range need are now being filled with either older buildings that are being condoized or turned into apartments or condos, or new buildings going up completely for housing to fit that specific side of the market. But it's a great question. Yeah, I wish I had more answers.
Yeah, Pat, I can tell you a lot of it's because of red tape, the cost of developing. I mean, it is so expensive to develop land, and the builders want to make as much profit for their efforts as they possibly can. So, when you're dealing with, infrastructure, stormwater management, putting in roads, curbs, gutters, panhandles, like I said, stormwater management, rain gardens now, depending on, with the connection charges, the fees that are involved in bringing water and sewer regulation, now sprinkler systems, and the upgrading the streets and the communities to get flow rate, things like that. There's a lot that goes into the development process. And when they get a finished lot, they want to build as profitable of a house as they possibly can. And like Blaine had indicated, I mean, there are 2 different sides to this, right? There's the side that we need affordable housing, and then there's the people that say, but not in my neighborhood. Right. So what happens from an appraiser standpoint too, I mean, if you think about this, you don't want to be the most expensive house on the street, right? You want to be the least expensive house on the street because the bigger and more expensive houses bring your value up. Well, the same goes in the exact opposite. The less expensive houses in the area bring your values down. It's just the way it works. So, it's kind of it's a problem, right? We want affordable housing, but not in our neighborhood. And number two, the red tape to develop, and and I won't say tree huggers, but I mean, let's call it whatever you want to call it. They don't want to develop more land. So, the more that restrictive we are in the ability to, I think it was back in it was either in the late 30s or in the 40s. I think it was, my memory serving me correctly, maybe it was Time Magazine. We did a video on it. It was the headlines at that time were the government cuts essentially red tape to allow builders to come in and develop more affordable housing. And that was when, after World War II, I believe, that when we had the big housing crisis too. We didn't have enough affordable housing, and they wanted people to own homes, but, they didn't have, affordable housing back then. And that's when we saw, only the rich had these one-off type designed houses. Everything was basically, cookie cutter. Our 60s, 50, 60, homes built in the 1950s and 60s, those neighborhoods reflect that. The smaller 3-bedroom, 1-bath, home, very affordable for, working class families and working class people. And now we've just gotten far away from that. And I think everybody now, says that they need a McMansion, or, the pressure is on for them to, buy more house than what they can afford. And along the line with that is, people think that owning a house is this great investment, right? And we've found out that when we experienced the 2008 crisis, there were many people that lost their shirts. Millions of people lost their homes to foreclosures. The prices then were skyrocketing, going up, nowhere near like they have in the last several years even. So, the amount of homes that we go in that are not furnished, that people are struggling, they can't make repairs, rooms, empty rooms, that don't have furniture in them, because they could never afford to do it. New houses that they bought that still have the safety, railing up off of the sliding glass door in the back of the house, that they never put a deck on their house. They bought into the neighborhood. They bought into, being completely cash strapped. And there are a lot of financial advisors that will say that the number one reason why most Americans are ill prepared for retirement is because they overpaid for years and years and years on a place to live, right? They were unable to save enough money because they overspent on their home. And so, we need affordable housing. I hope that we get back to that. I see a lot of different, proposals that are being discussed right now, but it will take, opening up some of these, areas to build on, reducing some of the zoning laws and requirements, some of the red tape, in order to make this happen. This is not just a builder issue, is what I'm basically saying here. This is not, hey, builder, we want you to do a public service and, take that 150 lot subdivision that you waited 10 years to get and, give it away. Right. So they're just not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
Got a question here from Lexi about, the future and what's going to be happening here in the spring and the summer. Lexi, thank you so much for your question. Has your opinion on inventory changed for this spring, summer? I'm worried it will be just a standoff between buyers and sellers, kicks the can down the road.
Yeah, great question, Lex. Again, no crystal ball, no certainties, only probabilities. I would say unless there is some black swan event, unless there's something major, uh, all the information we have going into this market is that we're probably going to see something similar to last year, because we know the big numbers. There is not enough inventory for the number of buyers. Now, the things that can change that, of course, are if they keep increasing the Fed rate or interest rates, which some are saying they're going to do, and then there's some pundits who are saying nope, they can't. Fed's going to pivot and the rates are going to come down. Hasn't happened yet. So rates go up and they, bring everything to a halt. Well, then inventory could catch up, but then you won't have buyers wanting to buy those houses. So as long as the inventory situation remains the same, I think we will be kicking the can down the road again this year.
We had a comment here. I'm just going to read a couple of these. Bear with me. We had Dustin, people are having a hard time closing because by the time they close, it doesn't appraise for what it's supposed to. So the buyer has to come up with more down.
Yeah, Dustin, good point. And I would take issue with the words supposed to. I mean, the appraisal isn't supposed to do anything other than report what the market is showing. We see this all the time where buyers want what they want. They want the house. We talked earlier about the definition of worth. It's worth it to that buyer. Keeping in mind, of course, all buyers are speculative buying. When they're buying, they are buying assuming their house is going to go up in value. And so many are willing to overpay. They're essentially buying into their future. They're saying, I'll overpay by 40 or 50 grand to get this house because I'm pretty confident it'll catch up at some point. They're speculative buying. Well, an appraisal does not fit into that in any way. All the appraisal is going to do is say, as of today, based on like kind properties or similar comparable sales, the house is valued at this. Not saying what it's worth to you, but per Fannie Mae's definition, the most probable price for a house like this is X. And unfortunately, as we've already stated, appraisals are always backward looking because the best comparable sales closed yesterday or last week, last month, or last year. We can't use pendings or current listings. We can put them in the appraisal to show what the market is doing, but we cannot base any part of the opinion of value on a current listing or a pending sale. So it is just one of the downsides of the appraisal process.
How about this one, Blaine? Mr. Revel, if you are working in an appreciating area, do you adjust from the contract date or the sold date?
Great question. Thanks for the question, Mr. Revel. In an appreciating area, typically most appraisers, I would say, are adjusting from the contract date, assuming that's when the price was established. And we know, of course, quite often there are either change orders on new construction or there are addendums that can change the price between contract and sold. But also because there's usually not much difference in most cases between contract and sold, typically 30 days. At least in our MLS, it'll say, contract date of June, sold date July, usually 30 days plus or minus. But I think most appraisers are going by contract.
You guys really appreciate these questions tonight. We had Baker Morgan. I mean, is this true, Blaine? Is it true that if someone did an addition without a permit, the value is zero?
Thanks for the question, Baker. Again, a little bit of nuance, and I don't want to sound like I'm slipping the question, but it depends on the scenario we're talking about. If Baker is asking if there is zero value to that addition, maybe from an appraisal standpoint, the answer would be yes. To a buyer's standpoint, well, the answer might be no. Of course, there's value there. Buyer would look at it and say, "We'll take it. We'll take it with the addition." I mean, we've seen houses before where they have unpermitted additions to the house, and we just can't do an appraisal on it, and the bank won't do a loan on it. They don't tear the house down. The house is still there. And if somebody can come along and pay cash, well, they can buy that house with the unpermitted addition. So there's probably value in the market. There's value to some buyers. But from an appraisal standpoint, typically an appraiser who finds out there's an unpermitted addition will just step away. We'll notify the lender. Lender will say, "We're not doing the loan." So it wouldn't be accurate to say the value is zero. there's almost no case where value is zero to somebody.
How about
So I'm going
determining?
to have I just
Go
want to
ahead.
interrupt here. I'm having
Sure.
some technical difficulties on my end, but I did ask Joe to pull up. Blaine, I just wanted us to look at, and my screenshot is not really showing the best, so I'm gonna pull it up in a browser too. But Joe, let's share that chart. So when we were talking about, you were just mentioning the Fed pivoting, and will that happen? And I think that, and I sort of alluded to it earlier in the show with someone asking me today whether we saw the bottom yet of the real estate market. There's a couple things that are going on out here, guys, that the facts that we just can't deny. They're undeniable facts. We're not seeing locally here, and I know Blaine said that he's still seeing some areas where appraisal gap contingencies are happening. There are a lot of different things that are in the news right now that are scaring the living daylights out of people, honestly, as far as their, cash, is their money safe, or their job safe, or things like that. We have a different vibe, a complete different hysteria almost than we did just a year ago, right? I mean, if we look back prior to April, May, June of last year, it was full speed ahead. We had open houses with standing room only. We were seeing, the average list price over 10%, or the average sale price 10% over list price. We were seeing $50,000, appraisal gap contingencies, and just craziness that was really happening in the market. And we're not seeing that right now, right? So now we're looking at things as, now inflation is headline news. People are feeling it in their pockets. Blaine just identified and said that we're really looking at 18% is a real inflation number when we're talking about food and energy and, housing and things like that. So when we're looking at all of this data collectively, there are a lot more people that are, kind of, speculative that, this something needs to change, right? Then we have the Fed that is saying also that, the housing market needs to correct, that the rental market, shelter inflation needs to correct. People want to buy, they don't want to rent. They want to buy, but they can't buy. We're seeing where, they're no longer qualified for mortgages. So we have less buyers. We know inventory.
Oh, goodness. We lost Todd. We'll see if he comes back. But I do have a question here. I know where he's going with this chart, and hopefully you guys can see that. But we can take this question and see if Todd comes back. Another one from Mr. Rebel. If cash buyers require no appraisal, would you use comps that were all cash buyers to determine the value?
No, typically not. Cash buyers don't mean today what they meant in years past. Because sellers can get almost whatever they ask, at least in the last 10, 12 years, they could. A cash buyer only meant a quicker close, potentially, and maybe the appraisal not screwing up the deal. But it's not as enticing to most sellers these days to take the cash offer. So cash comps, if they are in the market, typically aren't always the best comps to use. So no, appraisal, we do lots of cash offer type appraisals where people want the appraisal done anyway. And we use just typical financed comparable sales as well. If we can find some cash deals, of course, we'll put those in as comparables, but we wouldn't fill the whole report with only cash buyer type sales.
I think Jay Powell terminated my internet connection there for a brief moment, but I think I'm back. Look, man, you could suppress me for so long. Where was I? All right. So guys, getting back to that, and, I guess what I'm saying is that, I still feel, very bearish on the housing market. I think that, we have a couple things that are going on right now, right? We have sellers that are sitting on the sidelines. We're seeing it. I'm talking to them. They're going to wait it out.
they're going to wait and see. They don't know what they're going to do, where they're going to go, but they don't want to give up their 2.75%. They're bragging to me. I spoke to a client today, Kevin, and I said to him, he was calling me. Well, I was thinking he was calling me because he wanted to sell, because a year ago we talked about it. He said, you know what, I'm outgrowing the house that I'm in right now. And, I'm thinking that I may want to, sell it and buy something else. So, we've kind of stayed in touch. But when he called and reached out, I thought the conversation was going to be like, hey, I'm ready to sell. But really, it had nothing to do with that. He was wanting to know whether I wanted to buy some turkeys or some pigs, because now he's a farmer, right? And but anyway, it was kind of funny because I said, well, what, I thought maybe you were calling me to sell your house. And he said, oh, no way, man. I got locked in at 2.74%. There's no way. My mortgage is $1,100, and there's no way that I want to sell. He bought, back in the absolute low, when mortgages were so cheap. But it's a different case right now. So, how do people all of a sudden now, and when getting back to the question, when people are saying like, have we seen the bottom? What? Like, seriously? Have we seen the bottom? I don't even think we've started to see the needle move, right? I mean, we've seen the craziness. We've seen the overbuying calm down. We've seen the appraisal gap contingencies basically become non-existent. We're even seeing where cash buyers want a cash appraisal. They want to know, is it worth it, because they want to negotiate with the sellers. We're seeing inspections mean everything to buyers now. There's more going back on the market now than it ever was a year ago, because of the inspections falling through, or the house not being worth what the purchase price was for, or the borrower not being qualified anymore. So these issues are real life issues that I don't see changing overnight. We're not just all of a sudden the news is going to tell us, hey guys, we just saw the bottom of the housing market. Oh, you can all afford it now. Mortgage rates are at 6.5%. And, oh yeah, that's double what they were last year. But hey, you can afford it now because the low is already hit. And now we're headed back up again. So buy now. How is that changing the fact that people, that they can't afford the house, right? And they certainly can't afford the house at the price. And there's nothing available for cheaper. So you tell that $350,000 buyer that, oh, you're qualified now for $225,000. Where?
Yeah.
So I don't see how we are out of the woods on this. I mean, look, the news, OPEC's reducing. I mean, I'm not trying to open up another can of worms, but let's look at the news. We have people, we're hearing the beginning of rumblings of, people not valuing our currency. There's a lot of people that are questioning that our currency's junk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's exactly why at the beginning, I said, I don't think you can talk about any local real estate market without talking about the macro, because if you're not talking about the macro, you are not taking into consideration all the factors that will eventually affect. They will come here. And you're absolutely right. And it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, but you're absolutely right. The Saudis basically just said we're gonna lower oil production. Crude oil, Brent went up. We saw Russia and China partner up. They're creating a petro yuan, which means that, for those who don't know what the petrodollar is, just study it, Google it from the 70s on. This whole era is changing, and you're absolutely right. There is a lot of stuff going on that wasn't going on 10 years ago, wasn't going on 2 years ago. And it's going on now, and they are all macro things which will eventually affect the micro. And you're absolutely right about the dollar. If the de-dollarization continues around the world, something like 70% of international investments are denominated in U.S. dollars. Well, if the de-dollarization continues to occur, and it will happen over time, what happens to those dollars? They don't just evaporate; they come back to the United States. something like $300 trillion of investments that will come back to the shores of the US. Well, what happens if those dollars hit our economy? Well, that is the true definition of inflation. Our economy won't be able to sustain that kind of that number of dollars coming back into the system from countries going, yeah, we don't need it anymore. So there's big changes ahead for sure.
We'll see inflation like we've never. We'll see
Potentially.
inflation at that point like we've never seen before.
Yeah. That is.
Let's
one of
show
the
that
fears.
chart. Can we eventually get a chart?
Oh
My
gosh, you're
technical
cutting out
difficulties
Todd
here
again.
this evening. Man, I'll tell you what. Look,
Oh,
stop that. Whoever is suppressing my internet connection, stop. All right, here we go. More fun. All right, I want to talk about this because, all right. What do you think of this chart, Blaine? This is the federal funds rate. So the overnight trading rate, where money is borrowed and lent. It's interesting because we started dropping down the Fed rate. It's not new. It wasn't just in 2020, right? If we look at this chart dating back to 1955, we look at, how the Fed has manipulated the federal funds rate to sort of stimulate the economy, right? But never, we saw an all-time low. What's that?
To both stimulate and to slow down. Part of what they're doing with the increase in the Fed funds rate is to try to get inflation under control. The problem is, we go back to that kicking the can down the road. It's been kicked, the can has been kicked down the road for so long that it's the Fed has lost control of inflation. They're not going to be able to get control of it this way via this method. But that's what they keep telling us they're doing. Remember, just a year or two ago, they told us inflation is transitory. It's going to be gone in no time. And but we know now that they were fooling us.
At what point? So, we saw this happen back in, from the 2008 crisis. They dropped the rate around 2009 to almost 0% to stimulate the economy and get people to spend money again, right? We came off a real hard time. And, then things were kind of going up from there. And then right before the pandemic, it had dropped down. And not really sure why, but then we hit the pandemic and you can see it, took a dive again back to almost zero. And some people say that they waited too long to raise this effective rate and call, a lot of overspending, right? Cheap money. It caused everything. The market, we know, people went to 7-year loans on cars. They were paying 10, 12,000 over sticker price. Craziness was happening, right? Car lots were empty, okay, call it supply chain issues, all of that stuff. But we bought a lot of things that we didn't need because the price was so cheap to buy. So as a result, these manufacturers made out really well, right? They were charging top dollar for their products. Now when we're looking at this chart, I guess practicality, maybe common sense doesn't matter. It may not, it just may not. But how can we say that the Fed is going to pivot? And with the prices of the way things are, wouldn't it be catastrophic for them to pivot?
Yeah, I think that is probably the question. And I don't have the answer, although I think the catastrophe lives on both ends of that spectrum, because we already see what has happened with the bank runs, that the increasing of rates, and we've been talking about this for years. We've said just the interest on the debt, if they raise the interest rate, the Fed rate, will break the economy. Well, sure, as we've seen, that with the increase in rates, they have essentially, they broke the system. And they broke it. The signs we see of it breaking was these bank runs and bank failures, which is going to occur. So they know that catastrophe lives on both ends of this spectrum. They know if they keep increasing the rate, which that may be their intent, they will break it even further, and the breaks will be big. So if that is not part of their plan, then the only other option they have is to go to either ZIRP, which is zero interest rate policy, or NIRP, which is negative interest rate policy, which Japan did for years. So they may think they have another tool in their tool belt, but it would just be a kicking the can down the road scenario if they drop the rates again.
Well, they've essentially bailed the banks out
For sure.
so far.
No doubt about it. They're saying it's not a
$4 trillion,
bailout,
I think, and
yeah, for sure.
yeah, I mean, they have loans available for them at, and so, I mean, yeah, I get it. But, at what point, I mean, it is kind of, when do we say that now we have to pay for what we got ourselves into? I mean, I look at it as, I think the banks only keep like 10% of the depositors' money. So when they were, giving out all the stimulus, and bank accounts were fatter than they've ever been in the history, right? I mean, the banks were taking that money and investing 90% thereabouts of that money. And then all of a sudden now, inflation caused everybody, and high interest rates now caused everybody to use their cash or want their cash. And the banks didn't have the cash. I mean, it makes sense to me. So what did they have to do? They had to liquidate some of their fire sale, some of their investments, and take losses on them to satisfy their depositors. I mean, isn't that basically?
That's exactly what happened. And I don't know. I don't know if you know this, Todd, but your listeners, maybe some of your listeners know, but the fractional reserve banking system that we have lived in for a long time, the reserve requirement was 10%, as you said, 10% of their deposits they had to keep, and they could lend out 90. Well, over the pandemic, they basically eliminated the reserve requirement. So then banks were allowed to loan up to 100% of deposits. And of course, we know what banks do. The banking model is they loan out that money and they turn it into new money. So it's money becoming money. And, of course, they're blaming the failures on these on bank runs, on people essentially wanting their own money out of the bank, which is silly. It's your money. You should have it available to you when you want it. But yeah, if everybody went and got their money out of the bank,
that was one of the functions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And the FDIC, I don't know if people know this, but your money is insured up to $250,000 in the facility, but the Fed only insures something like 1.6% of all the money in the system, which means I think they have something like 180 billion, I think, in their reserves, but there's trillions or something in the system. So the banks certainly can't afford a run, people going to get their cash.
So.
All right, so let's take a couple more questions before we sign off. I know it's getting late, and Blaine, we were so appreciative of your time with us. We love it when you come on the show, man. I could talk to you all night.
Thank you, Todd. It's always a pleasure.
Bear with me. I'm having a quick technical difficulty, and Joe just rushed over. One moment.
What's going on?
I don't know. My lights just went out. I'm really not sure. It's okay, though.
They do not want us talking about this stuff tonight. Jeez.
Blaine,
I think storming outside. I mean, maybe there's like some kind of a satellite storm.
I don't know if this is going to pull up, but let's see. Oh, yeah, there we go. Blaine, do you ever find yourself making an appraisal and thinking it's absurd at the same time? And I'm sure that they're talking about value.
Thanks for the question, Avenger. Yeah, of course, all the time. But appraisers have to be really good at removing our own biases, and subjectivity, and remain objective. But sure, in my own mind, because I'm a human being, I am an investor, commercial and residential. So, I mean, I look at stuff. I've bought homes before. I know what my home is worth. And then you see what other people buy. Even if I wasn't an appraiser, you look around at what people buy and you go, why would they pay that for that thing? So we certainly do see, we're not automatons. So we do see when people are buying things, we go, holy cow, look at what that market is doing over there, that neighborhood, and what people are paying. And of course, with the advent of appraisal gap clauses and things like that, I mean, when you see an unlimited appraisal gap clause and somebody paying $200,000 over the next highest offer to win the deal, of course, that's just pure absurdity. But it is what it is. So,
does it make you want to say, okay, buddy, this place is worth $1? you can use all your cash. Blaine,
yeah.
how much do you get from real estate agents? I talk to real estate agents and they're like, I meet the appraiser on the site at the house. And, I make sure that I tell them this and that. And don't forget about this house down the street. I mean, how much, do you take as what a real estate agent is providing? And, obviously, they have to be very careful too when they're talking to you because, they can get themselves in trouble.
Sure. Well, listen, we all understand that there are biases in the transaction, and the appraiser is really the only one in the transactions that is not motivated by a commission on the sale. We don't get paid based on the sale price. We don't get paid whether it closes or not. We get paid no matter what. So we obviously know that both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, but probably more the seller's agent or the listing agent, excuse me, is motivated to sell that thing at the highest dollars possible. That is their responsibility to their sellers. So when a listing agent wants to meet us out at a property, of course we know why. They think they have some sway or they can sell us on something. But listen, most appraisers, most good appraisers, most busy appraisers, not only are we seeing 15 or 20 houses a week, when you multiply that times 5 or 6 comparables, we're seeing tens of thousands of properties every single year when you add in all the comparable sales, thousands anyway. And so we see the gambit. We see the whole spectrum. There's nothing a real estate agent is going to be able to sell us on a property that they couldn't inform us of via email or a packet at the house. Having the agent show up typically only slows down the real estate appraiser. It's not as if the real estate appraiser sits there, oh, really? I didn't know that this was the kitchen. The stove gave it away. So, we typically know what we're doing. And I'm also a coach, like you, Todd. You guys have coached a lot of agents. If an agent says, hey, Blaine, do you think it's a good idea for me to meet you at the house? I instantly put on my coaching hat and I go, no, what a huge waste of your time. Go list some houses or write some contracts. Go negotiate a sale because that's where you make your money. Don't drive across town for 15 minutes to meet me. I know what I'm doing. You're not going to sell me on anything. So send me your packet of information. I may have to call you and we can have a great conversation. But don't waste your time driving to the house. You're not going to sell the appraiser on a particular value. Appraiser's going to do what the appraiser has to do.
Well said. All right, let's take one more question.
Okay, bear with me one moment. We will. Oh, there was a good one here. I'm sorry. It's just my computer's not working. It's not cooperating. Okay, one more. How about this? Who determines the scope of work, the appraiser or the lender? I believe the lender can suggest a scope, but the appraiser must determine how the appraisal is performed. For example, the scope of work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mr. Revel's probably an appraiser. The appraiser ultimately has to determine the scope of work because the scope of work means what do we need to do to determine to come up with the opinion of value per the lender's requirements or per their request. So the lender can say we want an opinion of value, but we need it done this way or this way. The appraiser then has to determine the scope of work. What will I need to do? Do I need to go out to the house? Do I not need to go out to the house? Do I need to get pictures of this? Do I need a survey of that kind of thing? So the appraiser ultimately determines the scope.
And Blaine, I'll just ask, just for the audience, because we're getting this a lot where the 203K is becoming a question. People want to do a 203K, which is a renovation loan, and where somebody can buy a property that maybe they wouldn't be able to get financing for because of safety issues, things like that, renovations that are required. And so can you just kind of speak to that? And are you seeing a uptick in requests to appraise for the 203K?
In our areas, I haven't necessarily seen that. I mean, we've done a lot of them over the years. I don't think as I'm thinking through it, I don't think I've seen an increase of them, but it could just be our area.
Yeah, because you couldn't get, I mean, if you suggested it when, certain markets, when we were competing with cash buyers and conventional financing was more desired than FHA or VA from the seller's perspective, you wouldn't dare ask for a 203K. It takes longer, but we are seeing for these properties that are sitting on the market, where it's going, 45, 60 days, 90 days on the market. These sellers are a little bit more interested in talking to anybody that will offer them something for their, something reasonable for their home. And basically, I mean, can you just explain the process of that? I mean, as far as, the looking at it from an after repair value and the time it takes to sort of put all that together.
Like 203K deals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 203K deals, for those who don't know, are properties where you're going to do some kind of renovation essentially to them, an FHA 203K program. So yeah, we typically are doing 2 appraisals. Now, my understanding, Todd, you might know better on this, but my understanding is they also have to get an FHA approved 203K contractor essentially to come out and give them the bids. And then the appraiser gets those bids, and then the appraiser does a current opinion of value, an as-is opinion of value, is the property as is today. And then we look at that contractor's bids, and then we find comparable sales that would have similar renovation. And so you'd get what's called a subject to completion value. And then quite often, like new construction, will be called out there periodically throughout the renovation for construction draws or progress appraisals, just to look and see, okay, how far along are they? Are they on track? So on and so forth. And when the property is all done, we go out and we do a final inspection to make sure everything was done to that contract.
Yes, sir, guys, if you're out there and you're looking for properties and you want something that you could build some sweat equity, from what I know with the 2 or 3K product is you can't be your own contractor. You do have to hire licensed contractors for the work. It is a little tricky because the contractor, if they've done this before, they do need to separate the bids, the labor and the materials out. So it's a little bit more work for the contractor, but it may be a way for you to pick up some of these properties that are in need of repair, and maybe that you can get some of the better deals that you're looking for these properties. So Blaine, we thank you so much for being on the show. Sorry for the technical issues that we had, guys. And Blaine, any parting words of wisdom?
Save your money. Keep your eyes on things. Watch the headlines. Dig into YouTube. Watch Sachs Realty and the YouTube show every single week, and just keep your eyes on what's going on, not just in your market, but in the bigger market, and of course in the world.
Super informative, Blaine. Thank you so much. And every time you come back, we just learn more and more stuff. And it's just, you can't put a value on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure's always mine.
Yeah, guys, if you like the video, you can let all of us know that you did by hitting that thumbs up. And that will help Blaine to want to come back on as well. And we'll drop some links to Blaine in the show notes. He's really big on LinkedIn. He has a podcast himself. He has a YouTube channel. So check him out, subscribe to his channel, ask him questions. He does monitor our comments as well. And, we've reached out to him and said, hey, answer this question that's in the comments section. So keep the comments coming, guys. If you haven't done so, we love it when you subscribe to our channel. Hit that alert bell. You'll know every time we go live and when we upload content just like this. See you next time.
See you next time.